Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Holly and thank you so much for watching. You guys, I'm not gonna lie, I am a little hungover today, so I feel like my energy is not at 100, but I'm gonna try my best to present this case with as much energy as I can because it's a really good one. It's a really interesting one. But if you feel like I'm a little low energy, then that is why. Your girl just had too many drinks last night. But as always, my earrings here are from my friend's little business, the Aurora Collective. So I'll link her below, and if you want to check her out, she sells a whole bunch of things. But without further ado, let's get into this case. So today we are going all the way back almost 100 years to 1935. And you guys, this case is wild. So grab a snack, grab a drink, you know, whatever you want, and buckle up for a wild ride. So like I said, all of this started in 1935 in Coogee, which is in Sydney, Australia. Coogee is a really nice beachfront town. It's a very popular town for people to live in because it is so near the beach, and it's just beautiful. There's a lot of walks and whatnot that you can do around the area. A lot of people want to live in Coogee. It's the place to be. But in saying that, it was 1935, like I said, so I want to set the scene a little bit of what it would have been like to be alive in 1935. Within Australia, the Great Depression started in 1929, but it was still in pretty full swing in 1935, with the unemployment rate standing at about 16%. I believe that in about 1931, which was the peak of the Great Depression, the unemployment rate hit 30%, which is huge. But 16% was still a massive percent of people to be unemployed, because to give you a bit of an idea, the unemployment rate now is normally about 4.6 or a bit under 5 each year. So 16% was massive. So to get work in 1935, it was pretty tough, and on top of this, polio was thriving, so a lot of people were really unwell. Now in late 1887, Coogee Palace Aquarium and swimming baths were constructed, and the Coogee Pleasure Pier, which was a large attraction including a theatre, restaurant and ballroom, was also constructed in 1928. And because of all of these things in this specific area of Coogee, it was a very popular place for people to come to. But unfortunately, the Coogee Pleasure Pier was actually demolished not that long after it was built. It was demolished in 1934. So this meant for the aquarium that all the people that had been coming into that area to visit, you know, the theatre, the restaurant and the ballroom, no longer had any reason to go there. And this wasn't good news for Bert Hobson. He was the owner of the aquarium in Coogee. Now this aquarium wasn't exactly like the ones we have today. It was literally a 50-meter lap pool. There was no coral or anything like that in the pool, and in summer it was literally just a lap pool. So in summer it would be used by the locals. They would come down and they would swim and do whatever in the lap pool they wanted to do. And then in winter, because it was so cold and, you know, there was no heaters or anything like that, back in 1935, the owner, Bert Hobson, had decided to repurpose the pool every winter as an aquarium. People love to go see various different marine animals there, and so he'd sort of just worked out that that was going to be his way of getting income during those winter months. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. But with the Coogee Pier being demolished, Bert Hobson's aquarium really took a hit. Once a thriving hotspot for tourists and locals alike, business was now slow with no end in sight. In the past, Bert had put fish, sea leopards and even sharks in the pool, and he'd noticed that the sharks were always the ones that did the best when put in the pool. So in early April of 1935, Bert gets in his boat and he takes himself out to sea off of the Coogee beach to try and find a new shark that he could put in his aquarium, and his son Ron actually went with him too. He leaves bait out overnight, and then the next day when he returns, he's actually really surprised to see a massive tiger shark connected to his bait. What had happened is a smaller shark had taken the bait throughout the night, and it had obviously gotten stuck, and it meant that this bigger tiger shark had come along and seen this smaller shark and decided to eat it for dinner, water, and so this is how the bigger tiger shark got caught, because it got caught on the bait and it also got caught on various ropes and whatnot that were around the bait as well. So he was really stuck and really tired by the time that Bert and Ron found the shark. The shark was over 4 meters long and weighed over a ton, so it was massive. Plans were quickly made for the shark to be transported to the aquarium, and Bert was just so happy. He knew this shark attraction was going to be a massive hit, and so he was really looking forward to getting the shark in the water at the aquarium. And can I just say as a side note here, when I heard how they got the shark to the aquarium, if we can really even call it that, I mean it's literally just a lap pool, but I was kind of shocked because apparently to get this shark to the pool they literally just dragged it on tarpaulins up the beach and into the pool. The shark was really tired, like I'd said, from being caught in these lines and trying to get out all night, so it wasn't really fighting or anything like that, and that's kind of how they were able to get it into the aquarium. But oh my gosh, animal rights people would be losing their minds if that happened now. Like, I can't imagine the trauma a shark would go through being dragged up a sandy beach and put in like a different environment. And I think the poor shark was a bit shell-shocked because it wasn't really eating as much as they'd thought it would, and we know this because the shark eating times were a big thing when it came to advertising coming to see the shark. Already in New South Wales that year, 3 men had lost their lives because of shark attacks, and so people were really curious to see these animals and especially see them while they were eating. And it wasn't like the internet was around back then. You couldn't Google what a shark looked like or what it eating looked like, and so people had to go out and see the real thing to know what it was really like. A few weeks later it was Anzac Day, and it was actually the 20-year anniversary of Anzac Day, so it was like a really big day for celebrations, and a lot of people had decided to have that day to take themselves to the aquarium and see the shark. The aquarium was filled with families and children who wanted to see this massive beast. However, in the afternoon the shark began acting differently. It suddenly started thrashing erratically around the pool, and it actually sank to the bottom of the pool. In a sudden convulsion, the shark coughed up its stomach contents, and the stomach contents included a part of the smaller shark, bits of a bird, and the weirdest part was that there was also a human arm. All of this was now floating around the top of the pool for all the eyes of the families and children to see, as well as a very smelly smell. I'm sure shark vomit doesn't smell very good at all, so I can imagine it was a very unpleasant experience. The police were called, and at first they actually thought it was a prank because it just sounded so wild, but when they got there they soon realized that it wasn't a prank at all. And then initially they assumed that this was just another freak accident which had happened where some poor person had lost their limb, but when the limb was analysed by a medical professional from Sydney University, they actually found that this arm, due to the clean cut, had actually been severed before the shark ate it. The arm was not clean cut enough though for it to have been a medical surgeon, so the theory was that someone had had their arm hacked off. And as well as this, on the arm there was a rope tied around the wrist, which would also lead these medical professionals to believe that it was hacked off. So police of course were very interested in finding out whose arm this was and whose body it had once belonged to and what had happened. The tiger shark was sadly killed after this incident because police wanted to look inside its body and see if there was any other human remains within the body, which there wasn't. But this is when they realized that the arm had been eaten by that smaller shark, which was the one that Bert Hobson had originally caught before it was eaten by the bigger tiger shark. And for this reason, because the arm was in the smaller shark, it meant that the digestive juices which are inside a shark hadn't gotten to breaking down the arm, which meant that the arm was preserved really well. So well, in fact, that there was actually a distinguishable tattoo on the arm. It was a tattoo of 2 boxers boxing, and as well as this, police could actually get fingerprints off of the hand of the arm. When police put these fingerprints into their system, which I can imagine in 1930 1935 was probably just a book of photos of other fingerprints, but they actually had a match. The match was to a man by the name of James Jim Smith, who had his fingerprints in the system already due to the fact that he took place in a little bit of illegal gambling. And the arm was also identified as James's when his wife came in and confirmed that the tattoo was his. So let's talk a bit about James Jim Smith. He was born in England in 1890, and I believe he met his wife Gladys Smith when in England. He grew up in pretty tough times in England, and he didn't have a lot of money, but he was described as someone who couldn't be bullied around. James was actually an amateur boxer, which is something that he'd done a lot of in England, and so when he came to Australia, he continued to do his boxing, and by the time he came to Australia, he had his wife and a few kids in tow. He actually started up a gym in Leichhardt, which was running really well, and on top of this, he had a bit of a betting business, and this betting business wasn't legal, but James was a charmer. He knew how to talk and who to talk to get what he wanted, and so through this business, James met quite a few interesting characters who had a bit of money to spend. One of the people that James started to spend a bit of time with was a man by the name of Reginald William Lloyd Holmes. Now, William Holmes was a businessman. He lived in a beautiful home on the Sydney Harbour, and he had inherited his father's boat building business. So this man was doing well financially. The business was operating at McMahon's Point out of Lavender Bay, and this business was doing really well. It was actually the first business to start building speedboats within Australia. His real money-making scheme though was using his speedboats to coordinate cocaine drops from passing ships in the Sydney Harbour, which would then be sold in the city. Back then, there was no planes. You know, the main form of transportation was boats, and so the fact that William Holmes had such a grip on the main transportation industry meant that he had a lot of say on what got in and out. As well as this, Holmes would actually steal money through insurance scams. One of his most famous insurance scams involved the destruction of an overinsured yacht. Basically, because of how much influence William Holmes had, he was able to insure boats for amounts of money well above what they were actually worth. In this particular case with James Smith, William Holmes had insured a boat called the Pathfinder for a lot more money than it was worth. About £8,500 is how much he was able to insure that boat for, which in today's money equates to almost $500,000. William then offered James Smith £500 to be the one to take the boat out to sea and figure out a way to sink it, because when this overinsured boat was sunk, they would be able to then get that big payout of money. The reason William wanted James to sink the boat though is like any criminal really, he just didn't want to be the one doing the dirty work. He didn't want to be the one involved if the plan was to fall apart. He just wanted to be the one to reap the rewards. So on that day, James Smith set out in the Pathfinder. He set out off of Terrigal, which for those of you that don't know, Terrigal is a little town on the central coast of Australia. It is also a beautiful town. And so James set out from there. He had a plan to smash the pipes at the bottom of the boat and let the boat sink that way. But unfortunately, his plan didn't quite go as he had expected. The boat was taking a really long time to sink, and as he was rowing away in his little dinghy, a Coast Guard actually saw him rowing away and sailed over to him. They could see the Pathfinder sinking, and they actually asked James if he needed a hand, but he completely freaked out and he did not say a word to the captain or the crew on that ship. He literally just kept rowing. The captain and the crew obviously found this very suspicious, especially because he was so far out at sea and they were just trying to help him, and no one in their right mind would just literally ignore you and keep rowing when you're trying to help them from their sinking ship. So they ended up reporting the incident to the police. So James Smith was really angry about the whole experience. It obviously hadn't gone to plan and he had almost died from that long ass row back to shore. He wasn't having a bar of it that day, and to make matters worse, he felt like he was completely underpaid by William Holmes after this incident, and so he just sort of lost respect for William Holmes. The police were involved in this incident because, like I'd said before, the Coast Guard had contacted them, but as well as that, the insurance company had just found the whole thing really suspicious, how there was only one person on this boat that was insured for a lot of money, and so they ended up contacting the police too. And because the police had both of these reports, they obviously investigated the situation, and as I'm sure you guys can imagine, they didn't get that big amount of money that they were hoping for. So James Smith was really annoyed at Holmes, and almost as revenge, he decided it would be a good idea for him to be an informant to the police on William Holmes. And I believe he was an informant on other things as well. This guy was just a bit of a snitch, but for the purpose of this video, we'll just focus on his informing when it comes to William Holmes. Now, like I had said before, James Smith knew a lot of dodgy people, and someone that he started to hang around a little bit more was a man by the name of Patrick Brady, also known as Paddy. And Paddy, like James, was known to be a bit of a charmer. He was known to dress really well and really dapper, and he was an ex-serviceman and convicted forger. Paddy was apparently pretty good at forging checks, but you've got to wonder how good he really was if he was a convicted forger. I don't know, I mean, maybe he learnt better skills while he was in prison for forging. But either way, Paddy and James almost became like a duo. Together they would forge checks from Holmes' wealthy boat clients for negligent amounts, and they would use both Holmes and Smith's businesses to cash the checks. Although Jimmy didn't like Holmes, for whatever reason they decided to work together again. I don't know, I guess when you are given the option of making a lot of money, sometimes you'll push past the fact you really don't like someone. But this smooth sailing didn't last long. Paddy and James were starting to get greedy. They wanted more and more money from Holmes's clients, and Holmes was feeling the pressure. You know, these were his actual literal clients, so he was starting to feel like he was a little bit lost in the middle. And Holmes couldn't really back out because he was being blackmailed by Paddy and James. You know, they knew all of the things that he got up to, and so if he was to back out, he knew that they would probably just go straight to the police and get him in trouble. At the same time, Holmes had a pretty bad drinking problem. It's also believed he had drug addiction issues, and James was the same. He also had a really bad drinking problem. He had issues with drinking way too much, James did, and he was just starting to become a bit of a general nuisance. Holmes was well aware that James was an informer to the police, and so he wanted him gone. And Patrick Brady felt the same. He had once loved working with James, but now he just didn't trust him at all. They had a lot of disagreements about the money that they were stealing and who should get what and whatnot. And so Patrick and William almost sort of banded together. They both just realized that their lives would be a lot easier if they didn't have to deal with James Smith. So April 8th rolls around, and James Smith has been invited on a fishing trip with Patrick Brady. James was actually really excited for this trip. He really enjoyed fishing, and he had even invited one of his friends and his brother to come along on the trip. But those two men were both busy, so they actually declined, and so James Smith just went by himself. So James sets out on this fishing trip with Patrick, but the thing is, he never returns. At first, James's wife didn't even know where he was because he hadn't actually told her that he was going on this fishing trip, but it wasn't long before witnesses came forwards to police saying that they had seen Patrick Brady and James Smith drinking the night prior at the Cecil Hotel in Cronulla. So it didn't take police long to focus on Patrick Brady. Patrick Brady was taken in by police, and he was questioned on the case for hours, and at first he wouldn't give anything away. The thing was though, police were speaking to other people about Patrick Brady, and his landlord who owned the cottage that Patrick was renting at the time had noted that furniture within the cottage, such as a big trunk and various different mats, had been replaced, and on top of this, ropes from a boat that he was using were missing. Brady had also asked a taxi man to help move a massive trunk, which was the trunk that was now missing. And as well as this, on the night that James Smith went missing, that taxi man recalled being asked by Patrick Brady to be dropped off at William Holmes' house. The taxi guy remembered this because William Holmes had been acting really erratic that night, and he was hiding something under his coat as well. And he just seemed super unkempt, like more than usual, and so the taxi guy thought it was weird. Police thought that this case was going to be a pretty easy one because they had already arrested Patrick Brady, and they felt like they were starting to get a bit of a story pieced together. The circumstantial evidence and witness reports courts all tied in together. And so a date was set for Patrick Brady to stand trial. An easy trial would not be the case though, as our friend William Holmes had different plans. And this is where it gets crazy. So 4 days prior to when Patrick Brady was going to appear in court, William Holmes took a bottle of alcohol from his house and a pistol, and he got in his speedboat and he sped out into the harbour. Holmes attempted to commit suicide with his gun, but Holmes was already really quite drunk and he actually shot himself in the head. But the thing was, miraculously, the bullet had actually only skimmed the bone of his forehead. The shock of this though had blasted him backwards over the boat and into the water and actually had knocked him out, but he must have regained consciousness pretty quickly because he regained consciousness and climbed back into his boat. The police were on his tail by this point. I mean, this man was driving erratically, but when he got back in his boat, he drove into Circular Quay and just started driving around. Because of how crazy he was driving around, he stopped all the morning ferry services and continued to do this for 4 hours. 2 police boats were chasing him, and after he led them out over 2 k's into sea, he finally surrendered. He turned off his boat and police arrested him. Once in custody, Holmes told detectives that the night that James Smith went missing, Brady had turned up at his house holding Jimmy's severed arm and threatened to blackmail Holmes if he didn't pay him £500. Patrick explained to Holmes that he had killed Jimmy and dismembered his body, and if he didn't do what he said, the same fate would happen to William Holmes. He told Holmes though that after dismembering James's body, I feel like I'm switching between James and Jimmy, I'm sorry you guys, but it's the same person. But after he dismembered Jimmy's body, he put him in a trunk and he threw that trunk into the Gunnamatta Bay. These type of ocean burials were actually reasonably common. They were described as the Sydney send-off in crime circles in the 20s and 30s. The left arm with its distinctive tattoo was kept so that James's body would never be able to be identified. So Holmes understandably was freaked out and he paid Brady the money. Brady left the arm on his table and he left. In a panic, Holmes said that he drove to Maroubra when it was dark and he tossed the arm into the ocean where it was then eaten by a shark. After telling his version of events to the police, Holmes decided to testify against Brady in court. But the morning the inquest was set to begin, William Holmes was found under the harbour bridge in his car with 3 bullet holes in his chest. It has been widely speculated that Holmes orchestrated a hitman to take him out in a bizarre and violent suicide, but it is probably more likely that Brady organized the murder. However, the thing is that Holmes did have a lot of enemies, so we will never fully know who it was that ended William Holmes's life. And without Holmes, the police felt as if they didn't have enough evidence, and so the case quickly fell apart. Patrick Brady was actually released with no convictions at all. And to this day, nobody has ever been charged over either of those deaths of James Smith or William Holmes. And Brady continued to deny having anything to do with either of those deaths until the day he died. Jimmy Smith's body has never been found, and we will likely never really know what fully happened in this situation. But you guys, with that brings me to the end of this case. I feel like this case is just such a wild one because it's just such a freak thing that that shark ended up vomiting up the arm. Because the thing is, if that shark had never been caught, no one would have ever known what had happened to James Smith or where he'd gone. It would have just been another missing man under suspicious circumstances. I would honestly give anything to have been in the room with either William Holmes or Patrick Brady when they found out that a shark had vomited up a human arm. I bet they would have never expected it to come out in that way, and so yeah, I would just be so curious to see how they reacted. I can imagine they were freaking out. But anyways, you guys, that brings me to the end of this wild case. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Feel free to comment below any questions or queries or anything like that. I would love to chat to you guys in the comments below, and I really hope I see you in my next video. Bye, you guys.